couple nights ago, there was a very tender moment. I have some grandsons here also. Teddy is a student at BYU. What year are you in school?
I'm a freshman.
He's a freshman, he says. Andrew and I had a very Kathleen and Andrew were doing the dishes, and I just overheard a conversation. It was so sweet and tender. Andrew said, Mom, now that I've graduated from BYU and I'm working and I want to get that wife, how do I find the perfect spouse? And she said, Andrew, I don't know. Go ask your dad. He was much better at that than I was. As my witnesses, I was way, way better at that. And I'm so grateful, sweetheart, for all you've done and look forward to the next chapters we're going to enjoy together. Okay. The story is told of the terrorists that captured a plane full of tourists. And there were 3 Americans on board, and they were going to shoot them. And they were all LDS, a bishop, a high counselor, and an elders quorum president. And they asked the bishop, do you have a final request before we shoot you? Yes. Can I have 10 minutes of silence, no phone calls, no text, just a chance to meditate and pray? You've got it. They asked the high counselor, what would you like to do? I would like the chance to give one mighty last sermon to all the people here on the plane. You've got it. And they asked the elders quorum president, what would you like? He said, well, if it's okay, would you just shoot me before that other guy starts giving his talk, okay? So this, any of you who don't want to stay for the dumb talk, this is the time where you're supposed to get up and leave, okay? All right, sit down. Thank you, students and my siblings who know me very, very well. Okay, parting shots on healthcare reform. Substance abuse has been researched, but just it's so much in the news. I'm grateful to the Lord that I have a job. What a great thing to have employment in this day and age. And to have a job doing something that's so interesting and so important. And so I want to go out swinging and talk about some technical issues on healthcare reform, some public health perspectives. Can we turn off the lights there, Carl? Does that work if we do that? No, I can't see. Let's see. So a couple years ago, we had a speaker come to our department who said, you know, we're at 14% of the GDP on healthcare. We've got to get this thing fixed. And he said, but we're going to do it. We've got all the different players, the physicians, the healthcare industry, the health economists, the hospital, everybody's going to be there. And I was thinking, you know, you're missing one key group, and that would be the public health community. There's a perspective that we bring to the debate, to the discussion, that if you don't have that, you're not going to do as well as you think. Just in terms of healthcare costs, this is old data. This is 2011. But if you went back to 1945 and saw the increase of different commodities, if they were to match the price increase in healthcare, this is what some eggs, gallon of milk, and oranges would cost. Certainly some of that, we're doing great things in medicine, but we're spending so much. In one decade, wages increased by 38%, but healthcare increased by a lot more. We're just increasing our spending. Something's got to give. This is a threat to our well-being as a nation, and what do? I would confess, folks, I am the problem. I got this in my mail last week. I now officially am on Medicare. You guys keep paying your taxes, students. But there are tens of millions of people like me who are retiring, and because we spend more on people in their elderly years, we are going to push your generation to the wall. And so we've got to get a solution to this. There was a report done by the Institute of Medicine for Congress looking at health in the United States, and they compared the United States to 12 European countries, Japan, Canada, Australia, and they just found in almost all key statistics, it's looking kind of bad. This is your chances of making it to age 50. If you're a female, the red dot is the United States, and we're looking at, 3 decades there, but you see these other nations are pulling away from us in terms of life expectancy and these key indicators. At the same time, we are pulling away from them in healthcare spending, spending about double what they're spending. You put those two things together, one commentator said, if this was an I Love Lucy episode, Mom, this would be the part where Ricky would say, Lucy, you got some splaining to do. Looking at those two graphs, how do you explain we're just pulling away on healthcare spending, they're pulling away from us on health status? Here's another chart that shows the United States, where we were in wherever, we were number what? And then 10 years later, the United States is down here in the 20s. In terms of our life expectancy ranking in the world, we're now in the 30s and we're falling. This is another graph that shows, okay, on this axis, put where a country, how much they spend per capita on healthcare, and then draw a line over to how long they live life expectancy. This is the United States. The year, I think, is 2007 or something. If we updated it, it would be on the ceiling. And also the size, the thickness of the line is how often people visit the doctor in those countries. We've got a system that's so expensive we don't even use it, but it's just what a statement in terms of the value we're getting or not getting. I'd like to talk about 3 blind spots that we have in society that contribute to this problem. And the first is the fact we are unaware of our declining health rankings. A couple of years ago, some colleagues and I did a national survey where we asked people, okay, we gave them a list of those countries and said, how do you think the United States stacks up to those other countries? A large number said we're probably near the top. Another group said we're certainly above average. The majority thought we were above average. And then the colors inside this show, in terms of the gap, is the United States getting better or worse compared to those other countries? Folks, 3% of the population, this is a sample of about 800 people, got it correct, that we are both at the bottom of the deck of that grouping and the gap is getting bigger. That's a blind spot. Until we, as long as we keep thinking USA, we're number one, I don't see a solution in addressing those healthcare cost problems. And so what has happened since 2013 and that report was made? Bad news. The next year they made the calculation. The United States life expectancy was slowly increasing, but it would take us 40 years to catch up to Japan, which was the lead country. Since that time, we had a flat year of life expectancy increase, another flat year, and then last year, folks, life expectancy in the United States started to go down. And as far as the reasons behind that would be a lot of economic factors, the diseases of despair, and looking at where you saw acute case of that. This is the European nations we're compared to infinity and beyond. They're going so well. This is Russia when their economy fell apart, a 7-year decline because of economic issues, and so that's a problem. Second of the three blind spots is just this idea we have a very limited understanding of what are the things influence health. Why is life expectancy increased over the last 200 years? The best analysis would say about 25% of that is due to health care, to medicine. And as we did a national survey, most people, 75%, say medicine attributes the vast majority. Lean over and tell your neighbor, audience participation, one reason besides health care why we live so much longer than our ancestors 200 years ago. I want to hear some noise. Okay, just as a foundation for that, in public health we keep track of vital records. They used to be called bills of mortality. This is London 1647. And these are some of the causes they had, leading causes of death. It was a good year for bleaching, child, bed, and maternal mortality rates. Distracted, you pay attention, Andrew, you can die if you don't pay attention here. Excessive drinking, found dead in the streets. Very colorful ways of dying back in London in 1647. And so how did we get rid of these things? Griping in the guts, students, if you're complaining about your grade, it can kill you, knock it off. This is my favorite. If you were killed by several accidents, I think it was your time to go. And terminal itch would have to be a horrible, horrible way to go. But all these infectious type conditions. So here are some right answers. How many of you, by show of hands, mentioned economic prosperity? Maybe the biggest single reason why we're living longer. We talked about healthcare. How many mentioned sanitation, water, sewage treatment? How many said improved nutrition is huge? How many said education, literacy, better lifestyles, tobacco, alcohol consumption? Boy, we've made major progress. Improved housing, anybody talk about safer working conditions? So there are a lot of things that people are just kind of blind to. This is from Oliver, looking at the boys going across the open sewers of London in the 1640s, or the 1840s, horrible situations. Lean over and tell your neighbor the answer to this question. What person or what occupation of this person has saved more people than anybody in humanity? Last class, the student said Jesus. That is the right answer. But I was thinking more of a secular thing. What kind of profession has saved more people than anything? And the answer is it's a plant geneticist, Norman Baylog. President Hinckley talked about him, his last talk at BYU, who just has gotten so good at growing hardy forms of wheat that's just saved a lot of problems. Other questions we ask, how did we get rid of tuberculosis, which perpetually was the number 2 cause of death year by year by year? And everyone said, open-ended question, well, what idiot wrote this survey? Of course it was medicine. Well, here's where we got streptomycin, the first drug. The vast majority happened long before that. I'm interested in this drop, how much of it took place there. And the public is blind to the contributions of these other non-medical factors to life expectancy. So we've got our work cut out for us. So we use scientific models to try to understand what's going on in the world. How many of you students have taken chemistry? You were born too early or late. You should have taken Greek chemistry. You only had to worry about 4 elements instead of this horrid thing. The 4 humors, we hung on to this idiot model for 2,500 years in Western civilization as the explanation for what causes sickness and health. Now, I'm not saying we're that dumb. We're out of date, but we're not quite that out of date. We're more like Ptolemy's universe here. Let's see. You look at Ptolemy's solar system, and the first response is he's got it all wrong. Well, he's actually got a lot of things right. The moon goes around the Earth. The other planets are in a circular orbit. He's got them in the right sequence. The stars are farther out. But there's a couple of things he's really got wrong. In our thinking about health, we're kind of like that. We know some things. The 2 elements we know are lifestyle and healthcare, and we don't know those other elements. This is Tom Frieden, just retired as the director of the Center for Disease Control. But he would say, if you want to impact the health of the population, we can do education and counseling is a little bit effective. The high-tech medicine, the clinical interventions contributes some stuff. This would be more the preventive medicine. This is the tobacco laws, the sanitation, but the most important thing you can do for a society is treat poverty, education, housing, those kind of situations, economic security. Einstein equals MC squared. Boy, I wish it was that simple. This is a cartoon that said if Einstein had been a social scientist and he were drawing equations to try to figure out why people are healthy and other people's are not, public health, or understanding what causes health in society, is certainly complex like that. Here's a list from our neighbors to the north in Canada of the things that they say influence health. Income, education, the social environment, how we're getting along as a society, social support network, unemployment, occupation, food security, housing, on and on and on. Medical care is part of it, lifestyle is part, but I want to focus on the last one. In this report by the Academy of Science for Congress, the Institute of Medicine, they said maybe one of the biggest factors is infant childhood conditions that plays out in a powerful, powerful way. And they take the United States to task that we have almost the highest, for many of those countries we're comparing to, the highest early child development poverty rates of any place in the world. And that plays out over a lifetime. If you mess things up in those early years, during pregnancy, the early years of life, things are going to stay messed up for a long time. When I was a kid, one of my favorite shows, a movie, novel, Bridge Too Far, a story in World War II, where the Allies were able to liberate half of Holland. But for the last 6 months of World War II, half of Holland was under Nazi occupation, and they starved them to death. Thousands of people died. The other half were under Allied control, had access to food. Well, years later, and so they created the Hungerwinter in Holland, where thousands of Dutch people died because of the starvation. Well, some bright epidemiologists in Holland 20 years later, as they were inducting troops into the Dutch army, said, where was your mother when she was pregnant during this time period? Which side of the Rhine was she on? Or when you were a little kid, where did you live on what side of the Rhine? And you could just see, there's a whole body of literature of how many problems, physical problems, psychological problems are attributed to where you were, which side of the Rhine on the Hungerwinter. One little girl's name, Ada von Hemstra, was in Arnhem on the wrong side of the Rhine. She worked for the Dutch Underground, was kind of an actress, would take messages for the Underground. She was 16 years old at the end of the war, weighed 88 pounds. This is a more current picture of her. You remember her as Audrey Hepburn. And she struggled. She died at age 62, and her son would say it was because of the starvation that she underwent those early years of life. And that's why UNICEF made her for life the ambassador for childhood hunger relief. And so there are a lot of things besides lifestyle and healthcare that contribute powerfully to health. We had on campus a couple of years ago the rock star of the social determinants of health, Sir Michael Marmot. He's famous for doing the Whitehall studies where you took the British civil servants, where you got a hierarchy from low pay all the way to the top, and followed them up longitudinally to see life outcomes and disease and so forth. And the two fascinating parts would be every increase of income brought an increased benefit of health and life expectancy. And that's after factoring out, do the poor workers smoke more, drink more, factoring all that stuff out. So just from top to bottom, there's no level where you got enough. The more you have, the better life expectancy was going to be. And the second big finding was it wasn't just one or two diseases. It was almost all conditions and diseases were related to the gradient in terms of income. Last one, the blind spot number 3, and this is the scary one. Americans fail to see how overspending on healthcare sector harms the public health. We asked people in the survey, you know, why do we live so much longer? Everybody said medicine. What would happen if 2017 you had all the benefits of modern life, but you did not have modern healthcare? No hospitals, doctors, operations, and so forth. And basically people said, well, that would take our life expectancy down from 79, where we are now, to about 47. And so the public attributes our lifestyle increase of the last 200 years, most of it, 3/4, to health care. Then the interesting question, okay, here we are at 0. What if we went to 10% of the GDP spending on health care? What if we went to 50, to 75, to 100? What would that do? And there has to be a point where if there are many things that cost money for health, if you spend too much on health care, you're going to decrease life expectancy. This is what we saw in that national survey. It was kind of the Buzz Lightyear to infinity and beyond. The more we spend, even up to 100%, hypothetically, of all the GDP, we'll keep getting healthier and healthier and healthier. I live in a nation of idiots. I mean, if you spend everything on health care, you're dead of starvation. But way over to the other side of the graph, there has to be a point where you reach a tipping point where we're actually, because we're spending so much on health care, we're pulling it away from other things that influence health. Brent James, MD, Intermountain Healthcare, brilliant health administrator, made the comment at a BYU forum a few years ago, the average dollar spent on education has a greater impact on life expectancy than the average dollar spent on health care. Wow. I would add to that, the average dollar spent on education, housing, fresh fruits and vegetables, on and on and on and on, also has a major influence on health. I got this 2 days ago, American Journal of Public Health is on parks in cities, green spaces, the impact of those things on health. So there's a lot of things that if you spend too much money on health care, you're going to start pulling away and health is going to go down. Now, if you can't get this, let me dummy down and use a sports analogy so that even Cougar Hall can understand this, okay? So, Joe Flacco took these Ravens to the Super Bowl championship, and after they won, it was a great story, he got an incredible increase, $24 million contract with his team. Now, they have a cap on how much NFL teams can spend on players, and so there were a bunch of other players that said, you know, I'd like to get a little raise too. There were 10 starters in the next year that jumped to other teams because they could get a better deal. And they went from being the Super Bowl champions to a team that did not even have a winning season in 1 year. And so what we're saying, another thing would be, Andrew, who's won the most Super Bowls as a quarterback, the best quarterback ever probably? Tom Brady has been to the Super Bowl 7 times, won 5 times, nobody's come close. How come the Patriots keep winning and winning? Out of 29 professional NFL quarterbacks, where do you think the best quarterback in history, where does he earn, where he is in the ranking? Lean over and tell your neighbor. His salary. Where would he rank out of 29 quarterbacks from the country? Where would he rank? Okay, here's the answer. You got Flacco number 1, he's at $24 million. Tom Brady is down at the bottom. He's in the middle of the pack. And so that's saying maybe the reason the Patriots keep winning and winning and winning is they don't have to spend the whole bank on the quarterback, and so they can afford those other boring positions that also have a huge impact on the game. And maybe in this thing called life expectancy, where we're trying to improve the health of the nation, if we spend too much money on the quarterbacks, we start pulling it away from the other sectors and we see life expectancy going down. Cougar, does that make sense? Okay, we connected there. How about Cougar Hall? How about that for a name for a BYU professor? That is, I'll miss you, Cougar. This is a chart that shows the different nations and how much they spend on health care. And you notice the United States, we're that outlier. Again, if you spend too much, you're going to start reaching a point where maybe life expectancy starts to go down. Very important book a couple years ago from 2 Yale researchers, The American Healthcare Paradox, Why Spending More is Getting Us Less. And they basically would say, let's just focus on this graph over here. Here's how much the United States spends on healthcare, that's the blue, compared to these other countries we've been talking about. They spend a lot less, but they spend a heck of a lot more on social service type stuff than we do. Study done a couple of months ago, show me a person that loses their job at age 60 versus 66, who will have the worst health? It's the person who's 60 who lost their job. Because the 66-year-old person said, well, you know, it's a bummer, but I got Social Security, I got a little bit of a safety net maybe we can fall into. So the idea that maybe we were out of balance, Maybe we need to control healthcare costs. I'm not saying let's spend more like all the European countries, but maybe we could have a better balance between healthcare and some of those social services that seem to play a big role. So in health, public health, we're kind of the intersection between the biological and the social sciences. Our good friend Keith Caron would be the person that could talk about how social environmental situations get under our skin and cause disease. I pay tribute to my father, Richard Powell Lindsay, who, my siblings, remember his title? He was the director of the Department of Health and Social Services. Those things used to be linked, and then the legislature said, nah, let's split them apart. There's wisdom in seeing those two worlds together, health and social services. Okay, this one's not published yet, some research we just got back. And this just is incredible. Okay, what should be the highest priority for the USA? Having the best, most advanced healthcare delivery system or achieving the world's longest life expectancy? Lean over and tell your neighbor, log in, what's your vote on this thing? Okay, here's the answer. This is a survey of 800 people, and I wish faculty I could stay with you and do some focus groups to figure out why people see it this way, but this just slays me. I mean, this is like saying, do you want the best quarterback or the best team? This is kind of another way of saying, do you want the best health or the best health care? One vote for health. I mean, this is the means to the end. This is the end. So my students, we've got our work cut out. How do we make a dent in this thinking? Napoleon Dynamite. Andrew, this is for you. I love technology, but not as much as I love you, but I still love technology. LaFonda, that's what he's saying to her. We love technology as a nation. And when I was a kid, I got to go see the launch of Apollo 13, courtesy Boy Scouts of America. It was incredible. We can put people on the moon, but we can't put tens of thousands of people on. There are things maybe in medicine that we can technically do, but can we afford the mass use of all those things? So we got to think about that. National Geographic, will this baby live to be 120 because of medical technology? Time Magazine, will this kid live to be 142? I hope not. And look at this kid, I mean, he looks worried. And he ought to be, because he's just come to the realization, if I'm going to live to be 142, I got to work till I'm 122 to make Social Security work. And so this is nuts. The Bible says the age of man, Proverbs, is 70. That's 70 years. I hope it's a little more than that. That's only 5 years away. Google Earth. Can Google solve death? This is nuts. When we do this Star Wars stuff, they've got a place where you can, when you die, is Cryonics Institute. They put you in this freezer, make you a popsicle, so that when you get further technology down the road, then they'll be able to revive you and bring you to life again. I'm counting on the resurrection, folks. This is just asinine. Gary Edwards, good friend. We used to work in the Utah Department of Health together. Gary, do you remember Culf Medical? We were in the old St. Mark's Hospital, and down the road was this. They had just come out with the Jarvik 7 artificial heart. This is 1984. This is the solution to heart disease. Folks, we have taken heart disease way down, and it's not because of what's on the front of Time Magazine. It's because of what Gary Edwards did with tobacco control on the backside of Time Magazine. Dealing with that issue is why heart disease has tremendously gone down in the United States. So for the carpenter who only has a hammer for a tool, all problems start looking like nails. And if we see everything through that medical lens, we're going to make some dumb mistakes. How many of you are from California, by show of hands? Raise your hand. Be proud. California, you guys always do these Proposition 99, 1987, California citizens voted to increase the cigarette tax by 25 cents and put a nickel of that into anti-tobacco programming media campaigns, and it was devastatingly effective. I mean, smoking was going down a little bit. It took a dive in California. Very quickly, we saw the reductions in the chronic diseases. It was like they invented a heart disease, a vaccination for these different chronic diseases. Well, the tobacco industry went over to the California Medical Association and said, you know, there still are a lot of people that aren't getting enough health care. How about if we lobby the California Assembly to take that nickel that's going into tobacco programming and put it into health care? And the California Medical Association said, sure, sounds like a great idea. And they did. And they got sued. And so illustration of we've got to have a broader view, a public health view of what contributes to disease and not do anything stupid. Okay, the year is 1952, is a very, very important year. It's November 1952. It's when Eisenhower was elected and when I was born, okay? So I like Ike a lot. This is my last lecture. They say that Eisenhower's most famous lecture was his parting farewell, whatever they call that, to the nation, where in his talk he warned the nation of, quote, the growing military-industrial complex. Now here's a 5-star general who's committed to winning the Cold War, but he warns the nation, watch out for those people, the defense and the military spending industries, because they'll always tell you, we need another weapon system, we need more money, more money, more money, and to the point it will hurt the welfare and our strategic position as a nation. We need a Dwight Eisenhower physician who will take the same thing and warn the nation about the growing health, medical, industrial complex that just grows and grows and grows. It's costing us too much money. Historically, there have been some people like that. One of my heroes is a German pathologist. This is the father of pathology, Rudolf Virchow, who anybody who's ever had a public health, I've never seen a public health text that didn't have a quote from Virchow. He was the founding, one of the great fathers of pathology, but also a social reformer. And this is what he said, the quote in all those textbooks, which my wife will now read because she has mastered German. She is doing incredibly well. If you don't speak the celestial language, as President Uchtdorf said, then here is what it means. Medicine is a social science, and politics is nothing else but medicine on a large scale. In other words, in terms of the political things we do, the policies, the way we structure our society, has a powerful, powerful impact on the health of the population. Another quote from Virchow, physicians are the virtual attorneys of the poor. The Kaiser wanted him to, we've got this problem of typhus outbreak in Upper Silesia. Virchow, what should we do with hospitals and medicine? And he said, it's not hospitals and medicine. It's poverty, it's illiteracy, it's our lack of democracy. You solve those problems, you're going to solve the typhus problem. His nemesis, the person that hated him and he hated back, was Bismarck. And they kicked him out of Berlin, sent him down to Würzburg, and he started the Progressive Party and just saying we've got to have social reform to improve the health of the nation. Carl, could you hit the lights for just 1 second? Finally, Bismarck had it. And he said, he sent a note through a courier, just ticked off at all of the, Virchow said, we're spending too much on a navy. Why does Germany need a navy? And Bismarck just had it with his guy. And he sent him a formal challenge to a duel to the death, knowing this milquetoast scientist would not accept the duel. And so he got that message in the mail, and Virchow looked at it, I challenge you to a duel. And he told the courier, tell Bismarck I accept his challenge, that we will fight to a death. But as the recipient of the duel, I get to choose the weapon. Please inform Bismarck that these will be our weapons. We will duel to the death with sausages. That's how we'll fight to the death with sausages. Here's how it's going to work. He and I will sit down at a table, and there will be 2 identical sausages. But in one of them, my students will have placed thousands of trichinosis worms. And whoever eats eggs, you can't see them, you can't smell them, you won't be able to tell. But the person who eats that sausage will die a horrible, painful death 4 months later, a disease that kills thousands of people in this country because you don't take care of him. You tell Bismarck, because I'm a man of honor and integrity, he can choose which sausages, but I eagerly wait his reply. He never heard from Bismarck. What a story. I'm just saying we need people who see the world, both the public health and medical type perspectives, and so that's known as the famous sausage duel of 1865, which, yes, and so students, we will have 2 sausages. Those of you who are griping about your grades, you eat the sausage on that side of the day. Okay. Carl, lights you in. We're about done, folks. Google Earth. How many of you like to mess around? I've messed around in Google Earth, zooming in, zooming out. And so to understand health, we need people who are experts at zooming in. And those are the physicians who have blessed my life, a father-in-law who's an incredible physician, and I know I'll be blessed in the future by health care. But a doctor has a person who's sick, and they zoom in, what are the organ systems, the organs, the tissues, the cells, the genes, the molecules. That's the kind of doctor, we need those kind of people. But we also need the people who zoom out. What are the social conditions, the other things that cause that disease in the first place? Everybody knows what medicine is all about, and I would say doctors are trained to treat disease conditions. But we also need a balance of public health people and a public health perspective who know how to reduce those conditions that cause disease, the zoom out. And so that's been my life, trying to work in that particular realm. I pay tribute to one other ancestor, Mary Powell Alice Lindsay, we forgot the last name there. First registered nurse in the state of Utah, my grandmother. She was sent out east to learn to be formal training in nursing. They came back and gave her the charge of starting the formal nurse registry program in Utah. Look on that list, and her name is the first name up there. When she was 90-something years old, my mother took her to the University of Utah, had an open house for the brand new nursing facility tower that the University of Utah had created. And they gave her a tour and showed her all the technology and just the neato stuff they were doing. And they asked her, so what do you think of what's happening here? And my grandma said, well, it's rather impressive, but I hope you haven't lost the spirit of nursing, okay? Those of us who knew Graham know what the spirit of nursing is, but that spirit of nursing. Last week on campus, courtesy Brad Niger, we had Laurie Garrett, big name. She's won what, Brad, the Pulitzer, the Peabody, what's the other P? Just a stellar scholar in terms of public health. A book she wrote a few years ago, Betrayal of Trust, The Collapse of Global Public Health. And basically, her thesis is we as a society have lost the spirit of public health. This idea that collectively we can solve things, we can organize, we can prevent problems in the first place. She makes a very strong case that that's what's happened, that's our problem. So, in conclusion, I just think as we talk about healthcare reform, we've got to have a broader perspective and not leave out that public health perspective. Summary, Americans are unaware of the United States declining healthcare ranking. It's huge. Americans have a medical lifestyle-centric view of health, and those things are critically important, but there's a bunch of other things we better take care of. And Americans fail to see the potential negative effects of overspending on the healthcare sector of society. So, students, I leave you to solve this problem. Will Rogers in World War I, somebody asked him, so what are we going to do about the submarine U-boat crisis? He said, I've got the solution. Just heat up the Atlantic Ocean to 212 degrees and we'll boil those krauts out of there. And a reporter says, well, how do you do that, man? That's impossible. He said, don't bother me with details. I'm a policy man. I wish we had time to talk about there are policy solutions, but that's going to be for another lecture. And so students, you solved that problem, but we've got a lot to do there. A story and a poem, and then we're out of here. How many of you have heard the story of the man who's walking down the beach and he sees these starfish that have been washed up, they're desiccating, they're drying out and dying. And in the distance, he sees a little boy. And this little boy seems to be bending over and doing something and bending over and doing something. And he gets closer and he sees the little boy is grabbing the starfish and throwing him into the water. And he said, little boy, what are you doing? I'm saving starfish. But look, there are tens of thousands. You possibly can't make a difference. The little boy chucks the starfish back and says, I made a difference for that one. Folks, for the record, I hate that story. The kid is an idiot. I'm with the old man all the way. If that kid had been trained in public health, and don't get me wrong, I feel as bad about dead starfish as the next guy. But if that's what you're trying to put a dent in, that problem, a public health person would say, okay, what could I do 24/7 that would prevent starfish from getting washed up on the beach? Maybe if I put some poles and some nets, that's public health. That's the way you do things. And so, last comment. I'm a Renaissance man. I'm going out with poetry. My last stuff, I'm going to quote some poetry here. Carl needed a light. Hope we can do this. It's said that once upon a time, and thus does this tale begin, at a lunatic asylum that had many patients in. An attendant had to show a bunch of visitors around and explain to them the meaning of each novel sight and sound. And many were the questions the attendant had to meet as to diet, clothing, exercise, and temper, sour and sweet, as to when the patients went to bed and how long they stayed, and if the patients went to church and if they sang and prayed. And finally, a visitor inquired how one could tell when patients could, with safety, be discharged as being well. I'll tell you, the attendant said, you step into the square, you see this horse trough nearly full of water standing there. Above it is a water tap from which we fill the trough, and if we desire to empty it, this ladle is enough. We have found that patients who were crazed when they came here, but who in time seem to regain their faculties quite clear, may still be weak in reasoning as to cause and effect, and so we have devised this way to test their intellect. And many prove they still are crazed by falling in the trap, which we devised to test them with this very trough and tap. We turn the tap on so that soon the trough will overflow, and then we bring the patient to it, and to him we plainly show we want the water emptied from the overflowing trough, and then we hand to him the ladle, and the rest is plain enough. For if he's still demented, he keeps ladling away, but leaves the tap still running, as it would do all the day. And on he ladles without the least effect. As fast as he can ladle out, the tap flows in unchecked. But if he has his senses, he knows what to do, of course. He puts an end to the supply by stopping up the source. Methinks this simple incident conveys to me and you a lesson which should teach us all just what we ought to do. And then the rest of the poem talks about British alcohol policy. But what an incredible analogy. Folks, we are spending the treasury of the nation on super duper laser robotic ladles. And students, may you raise the awareness so we have a nation with the wisdom and the will to do what we can do to turn down the faucet on those health problems. Carl, lights for just couple other slides, and then it's at Miller time. We're out of here. I do teach drugs. I've tried, colleagues have asked me, what's it like retiring? And I say, it's really tender. I mean, it's really kind of it's hard, how do you put it into words? You're ending your career. And I tried to find one slide that would capture those tender feelings of retirement. And I did find that slide, and here it is. I'm out of here. That dog on the end, that's me. And so I'm going to miss it big time, but I am so looking forward to the next chapter in my life. And so Auf Wiedersehen from Gordon and Kathleen. We're headed over to Freiburg, Germany. This is where we'll be working for 18 months. When we come back, I'm going to canoe for the rest of my life with my grandkids. And I'm so grateful for all of you good friends. I just look around and I choke up. Bless you all for your influence. Okay, we're done. Carl, we've got some sandwiches underneath there, and so starving students, please have some stuff there.